it's so great to be here. And as I said, I really hope this is this really is a discussion, because I think there's so much to learn from all of you in the room and online. And what I hope my slides, my presentation will do is really tee that up by really focusing in on what I'm going to do is tell you about this initiative that launched last year, Sustainability in the Digital Age, and kind of tell you why we launched it. And it's really an opportunity to bring people together from the sustainability science and the digital innovation and AI world to really focus on leveraging the digital age for societal transformations, both research, innovation, and action. You know, you heard a little bit about my background, and I want to go back to a story that really it happened about a little over a decade ago, but it really has shaped so much of the my perceptions around science, technology, and policy interface. That has been something that it is something that has really shaped what also the development of this. Apologies, there are things popping up on my screen. I wonder if those can go. Anyway, so the story I wanted to tell is about 10 years ago. As I said, I was at Google at the time, and on a small team that started something called Google Earth Engine that some of you may know. And the idea there was we wanted to take Google Earth and enable the analytical capacity of switch Google Earth just from a viewing platform for an analytical platform. And the context of this, we were sort of focusing in on the context of solving an environmental governance problem. And that was, at the time, think back then, forests were sort of on the periphery, very much on the periphery of climate governance discussions. Part of it was the science hadn't been quite, quite there yet to be able to assess in an effective way the carbon content of forests, to be able to incorporate it into international science negotiations. The COP and Climate COP had happened in Montreal just a few years before, where there had been really a prominent statement by the scientific community that that science is changing. But still, the problem was, how are we going to account for it? How are we going to really do these assessments? Was there an open and transparent way to do that? And so the Google Earth Engine was really created initially with that vision in mind. Can we create a global platform where people could do their analysis of forest change and forest assessment online in a way that everybody could see it? And that was sort of the initial problem that we were trying to solve. And we launched a prototype of this in Copenhagen in 2009. But in the process, my role in that was to bring in scientists who had the science, had the algorithms that could where we could take forest cover, pictures of forest cover from satellite imagery, and I'm getting notes and I can't see them now. I'm not as accustomed to this piece. Can you all see my slides? Okay. My role was to bring in scientists who had done analysis of. So some people cannot see slides. Sorry, I just want to stop because these notes are coming up. Okay, I'm only on the first slide. I'm telling a story. We're bringing in these scientists, and then to connect to this policy context. So I brought in a very prominent scientist, and we ported his analysis onto Google Earth Engine, or a modified version of it. And and ran it on Google, and the engineer said, okay, we're going to run it for the whole world. And I said, well, we can't run it for the whole world because the analysis was only done for the humid tropics. So it doesn't make sense to do it on the whole world. And the response from the engineer was, oh, but we're Google. We do it for the whole world. And it really struck me at that moment that the role of science and policy, the science policy interface had just changed dramatically. And this might seem sort of old news now, but remember, this was 11 years ago. And my thought was, if anybody can push a button and make a map that looks so professional of the whole world of forest cover, then all of a sudden there is a question of who is really defining reality in this world, and how does this affect how we govern in the future. And I tell this story because I've really grappled with this over the last decade. And I think that the emergence of the Sustainability in the Digital Age initiative is, to me, a framing for some thoughts about how we take that moment, which I saw as a powerful but scary moment, to be a powerful and positive moment for thinking about global environmental governance in the future. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit about the sustainability in the digital age and the evolution of it, and then hopefully open it up for discussion with all of you. So the context here, of course, is, as we all know, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement to keep climate warming well below 2 degrees, and to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals altogether, has explicitly requires a transformational agenda, requires deep and broad transformations across all sectors of society. And so the premise of the SDA initiative is that, as has already been said, one of the things that are driving societal transformation at a scale and pace that has been unprecedented in history is the digital revolution. And so with this in mind, the question was, well, how can we leverage these transformations to steer society towards a low carbon, sustainable, and equitable world? And so as we looked at this question, we actually started by reaching out to the world using a platform that we developed with MIT Center for Collective Intelligence called Futures Collab. Hopefully some of you in the audience or online were involved with that effort. And we engaged hundreds of people around the world on an online facilitated dialogue to explore these questions. And I'm not going to go into the details of the outcome as a report on that, but that sort of framed up the discussion and of what resulted and what shaped this effort. But let me take an example of when we looked at this, what we mean by driving societal transformations and using the digital age. Rather than the question, we didn't look at the question sort of what can AI or digital tools, what problem can they solve? What we really asked is, how can it drive societal transformation? The quote I often use to characterize this difference is from Marshall McLuhan, a philosopher from Canada, that has been attributed with the phrase, "We shape our tools and thereafter they shape ours." They shape us, sorry. And I think that framing of the fact that as the digital revolution evolves, it's shaping our society, it's shaping how do we interact with each other. And I think, we're it also opening up opportunities for us to shape our society in new ways. And we're seeing that certainly in the recent crisis. But what I'm showing here is just that, typically the climate crisis is broken down into these, 5 different major sectors where most of the greenhouse gas emissions come, which are driving us up this high increasing emissions path. And we ask, how can we get to net zero? When we ask the question, how do we get to net zero carbon emissions in the next 30 years? The answer is often focused on how do we decarbonize these 5 sectors? And it's certainly in that context, there's been a lot of efforts to turn to the ICT sector to say, how can we increase efficiencies? How can we even redo the structure in these systems to remove more carbon and to reduce the emissions? And this has been critical, and this kind of work needs to continue. But what I want to argue here is it's not enough. The process then is usually often taken and as looking at the problem as a whole is in the sort of vision of the carbon wedges, which was put forth, of course, from Pakala and Sakalo over 15 years ago, which looks at each of the sectors and sees how can you cut emissions from each sector and how would you do it? And since that time, there have been any number of roadmaps and pathways to decarbonization. Future Earth has led some, and I'm sure you all have led them in your country and regions as well. That breaks down how can we actually solve this incredible challenge of getting to net zero in the next 30 years. But the problem, of course, is that emissions continue to rise. And even in the context of this most recent COVID disruption, where there has been a brief decline, that this is not, as we know, a long-term change in the fundamentals of the relationship between greenhouse gas emissions and economic growth. And thus, the general trajectory is still on the rise. And so what we asked in this Futures CoLab effort, this online forum that we ran, was what is constraining society from implementing deep decarbonization pathways? What is sustaining, if you will, our unsustainable path? And the real challenge then is the focus on, while we do need to know how we can reduce, what we really do we need to understand those pathways. The real challenge in front of us is how do we steer society towards these net zero carbon pathways? And furthermore, of course, our challenge is we need to look at doing that by, at the same time, increasing equity and protecting and restoring nature. So why can't we do that? Well, oftentimes in the communities that the social movements and activist communities that we see, is the answer is political will. We need political will. But I always find that a challenging response. And it's sort of a black box in some ways. It's in terms of really trying to drive change, what actions are there if to drive the change. Influencing decision makers is important, but unpacking that box and how to do it, I think, is even more important as we really look to drive the big changes we need to tackle these problems. And of course, that's what people now on the streets or on the virtual streets are asking for. Not necessarily strictly political will, but really recognizing that we need a really broad scale systems change. So how do we drive system change? Well, we know a bit about that from the science community. Donella Meadows, of course, a famous, a prominent system scientist, outlined a few decades ago now, how to think about what drives systems change in a format that I think is is still very powerful for many. This is a stylized sort of cartoon of her graphic of leverage points for systems change. And I think the key issue here is that, when you want to drive systems change, she highlighted that a lot of the policy and actions that we typically focus on are way down on the left here by the system and low down on the lever, and sort of tweaking parameters and structures within the system. And while these can be important, they're not really high levers of systems change. As you go out further, she highlighted that the change in information flows and the controls of those flows have been bigger levers of change. And so we see that, right, because the digital revolution has had a huge impact over just a couple of decades. It's driven large scale and deep transformations in how we do business, how we interact with each other, how we govern, how we teach, and happened sort of without us noticing it all. It all of a sudden was upon us, and now it continues to happen very rapidly. So rapidly that it's actually been difficult for our social and governance systems to keep pace fully. But more on that later. But ultimately, the biggest lever she really put into the bucket of norms. I don't know why this isn't. Oh, there it is. Of norms, rules, norms, power, and mindset. And I think that the sort of part of the emergence of the Sustainability and Digital Age Initiative was focusing on, now that the digital age is sort of, digital world is sort of an embedded structure in our systems, it actually makes it more, getting out on that last lever we have more leverage there than we did before. So let's go back to then our figure of looking at emissions as from this sector-based approach, and think about what would this look like if we took an angle, a framing of this to think about a systems-based approach. And so the idea there was, well, underlying these 5 sectors are actually an interlocking of social systems that cut across them all, that are in fact being constrained and pulled up the high emissions path, if you will. They're really locking us in and reinforcing a high carbon emissions pathways. And these are cognitive systems, economic systems, and governance systems. And the picture here, if it's not clear, is interlocking gears. And that was very consciously presented as an image of, none of these can be separated. These are interlocking systems that are shaping our path. And so while it's important to understand those pathways and work directly in the sectors-based approach, the outline here is that, but that's not enough. We also need to look and address these underlying rules, norms, and power and mindset. And we need to disrupt them so that we can then steer them to the path we want. Of course, what I'm highlighting here is that we've had a few big disruptions, and we're living one of them now. I would argue that the COVID crisis, as well as the digital revolution, have both disrupted norms, disrupted rules, disrupted power, and disrupted mindsets. And the question that we face today with COVID, and I would say also with the digital revolution, is how do we leverage these disruptions to drive positive systems change for a climate safe, sustainable, and equitable world? So while there could be a whole discussion here on a COVID situation, and I'm sure you've been engaged with many of them, and how to sort of leverage this disruption for positive societal change, that's not going to be exclusive. It's not going to be the primary focus here, but I wanted to raise them together because I think they're in some ways at this moment inseparable. But the digital revolution is already, as we know, driving systems change in all sectors and of society, and as increasingly the human societies are interconnected to each other and interdependent on each other through both the natural and digital worlds. And this creates challenges, but also opportunities. In our analysis, we looked at 4 different digital disruptors, which we saw were already disrupting the social norms and power and mindsets in society. These 4 disruptors were our first, unprecedented transparency; second, intelligent systems; third, mass collaboration; and 4, mixed reality. These capacities, you'll notice, these disruptors you notice are not necessarily any one tool, digital tool, but rather capacities that society can, that are changing how society can do things. They're digital. There are capacities that are digitally enabled, but not necessarily digital tools per se. So, for example, in intelligent systems, certainly AI is part of that piece. But the idea of a broader, engaging broader collective intelligence and artificial intelligence as a component of looking at intelligent system is really the intent here in trying to capture it. Now, as we looked at these 4 digital disruptors, the first thing, the team said was, well, we don't really know where these are heading. And in some ways, these disruptors could lead us in an area that is down a path we don't want to go. But we also felt that while these are powerful forces, and if we work together, we can help steer them, help them steer us, society, global society, towards a climate safe and equitable world. And under the direction of, under the guidance of an advisory committee, international advisory committee, we looked at what would be some of the research, innovation, and actions that we would need to do to help steer these disruptors to help us get to a world where we wanted to go. We characterized and captured those into a research, innovation, and action agenda that we released in March this year, that we called the D2S agenda, or the Digital Disruptions for Sustainability agenda. And I want to just go through a little bit of how that was structured, so you have a context of the mindset, and then I'll go a little bit deeper into the governance piece, and then step back again to tell you about how that spurred this initiative. So as I said, we looked at, we started by asking what is sort of sustaining our unsustainability, what is constraining us from taking deep actions, and we identified, these issues of norms, rules, power, and mindsets that are cutting across these 3 systems. And then we looked at, well, how are these digital disruptors disrupting these 3 different systems? And then we asked, what are some levers of change within those systems? How within those systems, what is happening within those systems that are actually acting as levers of change? And I'm not going to go into each one of these because there isn't time, but I did want to talk about what we meant by these, and I hope you will, if you haven't seen the D2S agenda, explore those that go into these in quite a bit of detail. So the levers of change that we saw that really draw on sort of as a mixture often of these different digital disruptors. In the economic systems, the levers of change were digital platforms, transparent supply chain, and precision services. The ability of each of these were seen as opportunities if steered in the right direction, could help drive systems change in a positive way. And what we did is then outline specific questions and research and innovation and action opportunities across them. In the cognitive systems, we focused on the power of sort of nudge engines, micro-targeting, collective storytelling, and augmented engagement. I'm not going to go through these here again, as I said. I'm going to hone in only on one of these so that I can give you an example, as this is the governance space is something that the team is working on now, going deeper than we did in the D2S agenda. But the governance space, I think, is a real powerful one in terms of and there's sort of four levers that we highlighted. Is informational governance. So that's not the governance of information, but the use of information to govern. Collaborative governance, that ability to provide more direct, participatory, and deliberative governance, which I know Taiwan has really excelled in. The governance of flows, we typically govern at nodes of a systems in a place, and haven't been as effective at governing the flows among them, and the embedded environmental impacts, if you will, in the flows between places. And algorithmic governance, or what we actually shifted to be calling anticipatory governance. All of these are really powerful ways that have been powerful new approaches that have been enabled by digital technologies, but how they things beyond technology, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. And really, just as I said, tee up a discussion. So in the governance system, let's focus here on how we really focus on these three digital disruptors in governance, and went back to this picture is how are the digital technologies today really disrupting the rules, norms, power, and mindsets in these systems. And clearly, the increased access to open data, algorithms, and collaborations is shifting powers, rules, and norms in governance. Technology is rapidly changing how we collect and analyze data at a lightning pace. And as a result, governments no longer necessarily have the most data. Corporations are critical. Corporations and the masses, I will say, are critical really in defining truth. Transparency is spreading and increasing. And as a result, there's a shift in power distribution that has resulted in the onslaught of the technology revolution. So, some powerful examples of this, of course, at a global scale, just to highlight, most recently, just a couple months ago, Climate Trace, which is this collaborative effort you might have seen, is a project that aims to identify carbon emissions everywhere in real time. And there's a recent announcement that this will be enabled in time for the next climate COP. For a number of sectors. Now, whether they actually reach that goal or not, I think the main thing to think about is that, if we look to the future, this is in the near future, this sort of thing is likely to be there. On a similar note, the Global Covenant of Mayors and Google have joined forces to look at the emissions from cities and make those open and transparent to everybody in the world, and has scaled up those efforts in significant ways in recent years. And again, this is not comprehensive at this point, but clearly at the rate and scale these are happening, the changes are happening very quickly and are sort of in the near-term future. and not just in terms of where emissions are, but even more depth. When we think about these trade-offs, we need to really look at the details of what kinds of trees, if we want to think about species and we want to look and understand the trade-offs we're making in our governance pieces. There are also efforts that are looking at a much more detailed effort. This is an example of a project led by Microsoft and Sylvia Terra that has mapped every tree almost in the U.S. and looked at what kinds of trees they are and scaling these up to when at a global level will allow to make decisions that we didn't think we could make. We certainly couldn't conceive of making just a decade or more ago. And you know, so there's been a lot of investments in the technologies of how to do these different pieces, how to get more high resolution, greater frequency satellite imagery to be able to store and analyze these systems in the cloud and connect those with insights on the ground. And these sorts of technologies are really improving, and but I would say are sort of speeding up at a faster rate than our social systems and our governance systems have been able to take advantage of, or in a way that could really have the full transformative effect. And that's not to say changes haven't happened. We certainly have seen changes in the global environmental governance systems. For example, in the climate space, with the Paris Agreement, there was obviously a prominent shift in how global governance treaties were established, with a big piece of the global governance treaty, of course, being a shift from really a top-down, here's a problem and how do we cut up the pieces, to a bottom-up, here's the challenge and how can governments contribute, and an expansion of the tent as well, of actors in that context of the bottom-up structure, really recognizing that we need to bring in civil society and the private sector as part of the solution in a much more formal way. There are other changes, is this sort of expansion of the enhanced transparency framework, which is a key part of setting goals and then demonstrating access to them. We still don't know how that structure will work in practice, but it's a shift in framing. And while there is an exploring of how to bring in digital tools to support the analog governance structures, I think this can help improve some things. But I think that the challenge that we really face today is not how do we bring in digital tools to support the old analog governance structure of yesterday, but we really need to focus on reimagining the governance systems for the world that will exist tomorrow, when the climate trace system is there, when we have those global forest governance, forest images, and with every tree, and being able to look at, understand the process of the world and make trade-offs and have that be open. How would we govern the world in that system, and in a system where we can all collaborate online in a way that allows more direct and participating deliberative governance? What would be the governance structure, and how would we set up a governance system today if we were trying to tackle these problems? I think we need to begin to think about those as we set up the structures. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that this is an issue of ignoring the existing systems, but rather really begin to reimagine together how we govern the global environmental system in this new digital age in a way that really helps us get to the path where we want to go. And of course, these are not new ideas in the context of Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize winner, of course, often highlighted these issues that, the straight top-down governance isn't going to get us to where we want to go in terms of global governance issues, global commons. as Eleanor Ostrom said, there's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning, are better at solving problems than the people on the spot who have the strongest incentive to get the solution right. And I think the idea that we are moving to an area where, the people on the spot is increasingly, that spot is more global than it was 20 to 30 years ago when Eleanor Ostrom started studying the commons issue, because of the digital revolution, which allows people to interact in a way that makes our circle much closer and allows us to see and engage in the Earth system as really our own community. And so, I think the questions that this raises is, did Ostrom's work outline the systems changes we need, and do the digital transformations, are opening up opportunities to bring these ideas to scale? And how do we bring that? How do we explore that and drive that forward? And so, again, to highlight that, what is clear is that these 4 digital disruptors that we found in this report are clearly shifting norms, rules, powers, and mindsets, and have been for the last decade or more. And in doing so, is creating new opportunities and strategies. And these are the things that we're looking at in more depth in this. The team is looking at in more depth in the new program. What are people working on in the transparency and accountability? What are efforts around the world where people are using these powers for direct and deliberative governance? What are people working on in terms of using these new digital capabilities to incentivize and automate climate action at scale? And what is constraining all of these from having the transformative impact they can, that they could? Of course, these shifts are also creating new challenges, not necessarily new challenges, but new types of old challenges in the context of equity, privacy, ethics, and justice. And we can't expand and leverage these new governance strategies without taking on these risks and challenges in a serious way and confronting them and overcoming them. And so these are sort of joint at the hip, if you will, in terms of how we look at these. And so, and the idea here is not how would we reimagine global environmental governance in a world where, not looking at the analog world in the past, and I think our structures are and our processes, the Paris Agreement being one of them, even though there's a lot of important changes that have been made that opened up the power of the Paris Agreement as a real powerful framework for climate action. What we need, I think, begin to do is reimagine a world where, one day soon, I can't move something. Sorry. One day soon, everybody in the world has access to the internet. Or everybody has near real-time access to the environmental implications of human actions. Or imagine a world where multi-stakeholder groups were more powerful than multilateral groups, or where every global environmental governance decision was made on interconnected networks of artificial intelligence. Now, all of these are sort of in that we're sort of moving in the direction of a world where these will be true. And these create powerful opportunities, but they also, of course, create challenges. And I think that what we need to focus on together is how do we co-innovate governance strategies in a world where these and other images are true, other fundamental changes in how we interact with each other in the world are true. And we need to start to imagine governance strategies and develop programs, not for the analog world of yesterday, but for the digital world that is unfolding today. So that was an overview of sort of the context of what, with a dive into the governance space of why we see the this new initiative is so important, and the team is really exploring, how to connect with other initiatives and other communities around the world that are also engaged in looking at these sorts of issues of how to leverage the digital age for transformative change. So I want to turn now, with that as a backdrop, sort of the story of motivating and the digital disruptions for sustainability agenda, the D2S agenda, was an initial framing that really helped to set up this initiative. But now I want to tell you a little bit of how it has grown over the last year. The initiative has 4 pillars. The mission is really leveraging the digital age to drive transformative systems changes. And it has its research and innovation, training and networks, policy standards and best practices, and then collective foresight and intelligence. And I'll just say a few words about this, and happy to go into broader discussion. And there's more that you can explore on the website. In research and innovation, we've have, as we talked about, the D2S agenda already, and that has a lot more in it in the other systems and in each of the levers of change. We also recently edited a special issue of Technology and Society, which draws on researchers from around the world who are engaged in some of our workshops, who are thinking about these issues in different angles, and I encourage you to explore that if you have time. In the training and networks, one of the things that the focus of the initiative is to bring together networks who are really steeped in the AI and digital innovation world, together with sustainability scientists from around the world, but also to train the next generation of leaders. And I really believe that the sustainability leaders of tomorrow need to be fluent in the language and tools of the natural world and the language and tools of the digital world. And with that in mind, the team worked with universities and partners in Quebec and Canada to develop a new training program called LEADS, the Leadership in Environmental and Digital Innovation for Sustainability, which we hope is an opportunity to engage with others around the world, and also help build similar programs in other regions around the world. As we launched this, several other communities reached out to us and wanted to explore how to do similar programs, recognizing the intersection of these two worlds is so important. But as we said we can't just look at the opportunities. We also have to recognize, to be able to leverage these opportunities and these digital capacities to drive change, we also have to really develop the enabling conditions, if you will, that can support the positive transformations and overcome some of the challenges that this new age has created for society. And this was a process that this last spring, we also launched the Montreal Statement on Sustainability in the Digital Age, which was a collaborative effort in collaboration with a number of public-private partners from around the world, which really outlined a number of 5 different areas of work that were needed if we were going to create the enabling conditions. And these focused on setting a new social contract for the digital age, for society in the digital age, and an outline of key research and innovation areas, a focus on really calling for needing to have the regulation and the development of the digital revolution be focused on sort of inclusivity and social justice, targeted education and training systems, and there's an outline and detailed of this both online and on our website and online, which you can download. What emerged from this, as well as we looked into the enabling conditions, if you will, was a recognition that there was really a cross-cutting SDG that was missing. It's kind of amazing to think, and this is an example, I think, of our governance structures are really set to focus on look at the world in the past rather than looking at the world in the future. One of the things that I learned in my time at Google was in the Silicon Valley, at least, I think there's a real focus on saying we need a plan for the future, building things that are going to accelerate in the future because all these other things are happening at once. And I think that is such a powerful framework, mindset that allows such powerful forces of change coming out of those communities. And I think we need to think about those as well. And one of those in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals then is, what would be the targets if we wanted to ensure that the digital age supports people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships? What would be if that was one of the SDGs, SDG 18, what would be the targets that we would set and we would know that we were on that path? And I think thinking about those questions is a way of organizing and framing and orienting the kinds of issues that we were talking about today in terms of the framing of having a forward-looking look at reimagining global environmental governance in the digital age. The final area of our efforts in the Sustainability and Digital Age Initiative is to look at collective foresight and intelligence. And this, again, as I mentioned, was, a big part of this has been working in a partnership with MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, where we developed this platform, Futures Collab, which is a platform for large-scale consultation or deliberative dialogues, which are facilitated dialogues in an asynchronous way to allow the exploration of global systemic challenges and exploring solutions. As part of this, also, one of the things that we've been exploring is how to get a sense, especially in the context of COVID. One of the things we did was we released a global survey to get a sense of the global, to take a pulse of the world, if you will, as we go through this the disruption and the incredible transformations that are inevitably going to emerge from the COVID crisis. And so early on, when this hit in March of this year, we launched a global survey and then did another one in the summer. And actually another one will be launched just this week, I believe, by the team, which is looking at exploring across the globe, what are people perceptions of how things are changing, their hopes, their dreams, their expectation for the future. And one of the areas we actually explored are issues of questions about the digital age, and certain questions, for example, around digital surveillance, how people's comfort with that is. We asked, are people comfortable with expanding digital surveillance if it saves lives in crisis like this? And the vast majority of people responded to that with saying that they were not opposed to digital surveillance, and definitely most said they were supportive of digital surveillance if it saved lives. We also asked if people were supportive of individualized digital surveillance if it helped address crises like the climate crisis, particularly in terms of sort of characterizing individuals' carbon budgets, and if that was an area that people were comfortable. And I was actually surprised to see that, again, the majority were not opposed to doing that. There were caveats, but that was something I didn't expect to see. And we will have another one as I said, just in this next week. And we'll see there appears to be a trend, but as you know, 2 points don't make a trend. So we'll see if that's just sort of the trend that we did see is really more just uncertainty and scatter in the data. But it is interesting, and I raise that because, again, are we moving towards a world where we can have an equitable type of engagement, of understanding and having transparency of what people and society and communities are doing in a way that we could actually govern at the individual carbon budget level? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know the answer. I don't know even where I fit on the spectrum, really. I'm mixed on whether that's a world that we need to go to, want to go to, and can go to in an equitable way. I raise it more to put, these are types of things that are opening up in the same way the sort of visions we put forward earlier that are just, some way around the future, and how do we envision and reimagine the governance systems or our social systems at that global scale with these sorts of things unfolding. I think those are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking, not just in the governance sector, but in the economic sector, and recognizing collectively as a whole in the cognitive sector. And so I really wanted to, give you an overview of this initiative, and give you a little bit of flavor going more deeply into the area of governance, because that's an area that the team is working on moving forward, but use this really as an opportunity to tee up a conversation with this group about, how to think about these big issues together, and the opportunities. And as I said, I know that Taiwan has been such a leader in innovating and in global governance in the digital age, and in so much more. So I really look forward to having a discussion with all of you. And apologies, I understand that I'm used to Teams and Zoom more than I am to this system, so fumbled a bit there. But hopefully, all of you were able to follow along, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.